somebody has lived with inadequacy for a very long period of time, I think it's very difficult for that person to think of abundance and think of potential. It's very difficult for you and me to imagine that outlook.
Social entrepreneurship is not charity. Over time, we've been conditioned to believe that businesses and social welfare cannot go hand in hand, because we think we need to earn a lot of money before we give away some. But that's not how it works. In today's conversation, we have Mr. Suhas Ramegowda, the founder of Indian Yachts. Suhas spent close to a decade working for the corporate sector before quitting and escaping into the mountains along with his family. After living a minimalist life for many years, they spotted some serious difficulties that the local villagers faced when it comes to earning a stable livelihood. In order to solve for this, they founded what is known today as Indian Yachts, where they upskill a lot of these local villagers and onboard them to the e-commerce wagon. In this conversation, we speak step by step about how one should identify problem statements. How do you build a social venture? How do you solve these problems in a way that's economically rewarding for every participant? And more. I found this conversation extremely insightful, and I hope you feel the same way about it. So here we go. Suhas Ramegowda on Curiously with KVK.
All right. Hi. Good morning, Suhas. Thanks a lot for taking time on a Saturday morning to chat with me. Very, very curious to know more about you and your journey. But maybe do you want to start by giving off a small introduction to the audience about what your journey has been and what has gotten you to this forefront of social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think I'll keep it a little crisp to begin with, and then I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions where a lot of details will eventually come. I've been a typical urbanite, living the corporate dream, worked in the corporate space for about 13 plus years, and then decided we had enough of that life. So we quit our jobs, both me, my wife, and then we moved to the Nilgiris, which is a mountain range in Tamil Nadu, along with our son, who's now 16. And then our idea was to live off the grid. So we picked up land, interiors of the Nilgiris, because that's what we could afford. It was sort of quite deep in the forest area. So we cultivated that land. We built ourselves an earth home. So we were living among elephants and bears, and since the idea was to live off the grid, we were harvesting electricity from solar. We were harvesting water from the mountain stream, and we were growing our own food. So basically self-sufficient in that sense. But while we were living there, we also sort of got integrated into the local community, which was basically of indigenous people. And while we were having a good life, we realized and we could see that they were not having a good life. And that's when we came face to face with the problem of livelihood in the region. And that's when we decided, and that's something that we couldn't ignore. So that's when we decided, between me and my wife, Sunita, using our skills, whatever we have picked up through our experience, see what we can do. That's basically gave birth to our enterprise, which we call now social enterprise. Back then we didn't know, there was something like social enterprise. None of these labels or terms, were in our awareness. We basically started the enterprise to solve a problem. That's been a journey so far. And today where we are, we are supporting or impacting 21 women, all of them from either the rural or the indigenous communities. And we're using craft and commerce to sort of generate equitable income for these women, who otherwise their alternate livelihood option is daily wage, either to work in vegetable farms or to pick tea leaves, or in some instances even work in construction sites. So that's essentially what we're doing.
Good. That's such a wonderful introduction, and I think the work you're doing is pretty amazing, Suhas. So before we sort of maybe delve deeper into social entrepreneurship and stuff itself, did you always sort of know that you wanted to do something to influence or have an impact on the so-called lower economic strata of the society, or was it something that you gathered through your stay at the Nilgiris? How did this entire thing pan out?
Yeah. So we call ourselves accidental entrepreneurs because when we moved to the Nilgiris, it was pretty much our retirement.
Okay.
We wanted to retire from our sort of work in quotes. We thought we had done enough, and we also wanted to stay away from the city life. So it was in a sense retirement. But when we came here and when we stayed and when we became part of this community and when we started interacting with people, that's when we first time came face to face with the problem. Of course, when you're living in the city, you know that there is a problem. You know that, okay, there is a bottom 25% of the pyramid, or the bottom 50% of the pyramid who are struggling. You know that, but it's not in your face. For us, when we came here and when we lived this life that we wanted to live, it became very personal, because you were eating with the community. You were eating with these people. They are the ones who helped us with cultivating our land, helped us build our earth home. So we became part of the community. So it was more in the face, and it was something that we couldn't ignore. So that's when we sort of figured that there is something that we need to do, because they have been living like this for generations, and we could see that they are going to continue to live like this for generations. Probably the situation is going to get worse with their children, and then henceforth that's when we realized that there's something that needs to be done to sort of pull them out of this equilibrium. And that's how we started. So yeah, we really accidentally, it's not something that we always wanted to do. It was a realization in terms of the problem, and then our effort towards solving that problem. That's how made us an entrepreneur.
Got it. So I mean, sort of just borrowing some jargons here. I see what you're doing is perhaps something I'd like to call it the intersection of, let's say, capitalism and socialism. So it's kind of rare, because typically what we expect is whenever there's business, it's all about profits, or whenever there is anything about community building or social activity, you're more driven by a cause. It's sort of rare that you're working for a cause and sort of generating certain economic output out of it. How do you sort of look at the intersection of this capitalism and socialism here, and what do you think is really the pedestal for such a thing to remain and sustain?
Yeah, so I think this is a very important part, because when we were thinking through the solution to whatever the problem that we had in front of us, one thing that was clear is the sustainability of the solution in our mind. So we wanted to create something which will stand long after we are gone, right? So and that was the basis behind or a key principle that was at center of our solution, solutioning. So that's when we thought that we should build an enterprise which has commerce attached to it, or which has an economic output, because then it will sustain itself. The enterprise will sustain itself. I think usually there is this, when you're working in the rural space, or when you're working with the bottom 25% of the pyramid, usually the first thing that comes to people's mind is, oh, you got to be an NGO, or only NGOs work, right? So or it only has to work through philanthropy, or it only has to work through donations. But in our mind at that point in time, when we were thinking of the solution, we were clear that we don't want to take that route, because we want this enterprise to be self-sustained over a longer period of time, which means there has to be some economic output, right? Otherwise, how will it be self-sustained? So that's why we said, okay, let's use craft. Why craft? Because it's women that we were dealing with, and we were using women as a medium to bring about this change in the community. And women are very comfortable and natural with craft. And then you make things out of craft, or you create a product line out of craft, then you bring the economic aspect to it. Then you're making it self-sustained, and even if you're not there, then it can run on its own. So the idea here again was to in the longer term create micro entrepreneurs out of these communities, so that it doesn't end with the generation that we are working with. It has to continue. It has to cross through multiple generations. And that can only happen if there is an economic output. And that's when we thought that we should bring these two together.
So when you're talking about craft, is craft, a cultural activity that's practiced within the communities that you live with, or is it more of a vocational skill that you decided would be good to train these people?
Yeah. So the region or the group of people that we started with didn't have native craft skills, which we could convert into something contemporary and something that urban India would sort of lap up. So we had to bring in craft from outside. So the craft that we chose is actually it's debatable. There's two craft that we work with at the moment. One is macrame, which is a global craft, and then the other is crochet, which also is a global craft. The reason why we chose this craft is essentially because they don't need any machinery, they don't need any tools. It's completely handmade, and also it's extremely versatile. So in terms of converting or using this craft to create contemporary products or a range or different applications, there is application across segments. It's not just one segment. You could make products in home decor, you could make products in pet care, you could make products in kids apparel. It's really unlimited in terms of application. The other aspect is both these crafts also have sort of a bearing on the maker, in the sense they're meditative in nature. They're a repetitive process, right? So it helps them even from an emotional and a mental point of view. And that's why we said, okay, this is, these are the crafts, or these kind of crafts is what we need to choose. The other big element is the model that we have built is decentralized, which means women don't have to come to a particular center to work. We upskill and enable women to work from their respective homes. Because we live in the hills terrain, villages and hamlets are spread across the hills, and the connectivity is not as good. Transportation is not as good. So it's always a challenge to get women to come to one location and work. You're really taking away a lot of time from their day. And most of these women have small children to take care of. So that's when we thought that we need to come up with a model where we enable them to work from their respective homes, or at least from a community center within their village, so that they're not heading out. They're they're maximizing their time in the day between earning livelihood, managing their household, and caring for the children. So this decentralized model also meant that we need to come up with craft which sort of suits this model. We shouldn't have craft which is asset heavy. We shouldn't have craft which takes a very long time to sort of build an expertise in, so on and so forth. So keeping all of these, so basically keeping the beneficiary at the center of the solution is when we arrived at the craft forms that we are working with.
Got it. So particularly when you're talking about women who have to raise children, have to contribute to their daily bread at home, initially, at least, for the period when they had to learn the skill, how did you really manage to motivate them and get them to, spend hours learning this? Because at least initially, there's no promise of economic output for it, or there's no promise for, an asymmetric incentive that they can get out of it. How do you motivate these kind of people, or how do you really kickstart this engine?
So what you're asking is an interesting question, because that's a problem that we're grappling with at the moment. When we started off this intervention, we started off with a group of women who badly needed this intervention, in the sense that they really needed, they had no livelihood opportunity. Even their daily wage was in question, because here daily wage is again a seasonal activity. They didn't have that as an option. The other additional factor was that they had, most of the women that we interacted with or started off with initially had very small children, which means they couldn't go to daily wage even if they had that opportunity. So it sort of, we were insulated from this problem in that sense when we started. In terms of motivation, what we ensured is that we started teaching them in a way that they're able to convert or start making small products very early on, in the process. So 2 weeks into the training, and they would start making money. So pretty much the first month that they start with, they would start making money. May not be a lot, but they would start making money. They would start seeing returns, for the time that they put in. And then the second month it would pick up, and the third month it would pick up further. So we really didn't face a challenge. I think what helped us in the beginning, like I said earlier, is the other factors in terms of they having nothing else working for them. But now, when we are reaching out to more women who need this intervention, we are presented with this challenge at the moment, because there is a gestation period of first 3 months where they're not going to be making a lot of money, for the time that they're investing. So the return on time is not as much. So there are instances where women are having to drop off because they need the money right now. Their situation is not good. So they choose to go to a daily wage, because it means at the end of the week, they get that money and they're able to pay off their debts. They're able to put food on the table, etc. So we are right now in the phase where we are sort of creating an incubation program, and we are trying to get funds in place to ensure that we come up with a program where we provide them financial support the first 3 months. That gives them stability in terms of the income that they get while they are learning and coming up to speed in terms of quality and speed of production, so that from the fourth month they start earning a good income on a month-on-month basis. So we are right now at a phase where we're putting this incubation program in place.
Got it. So from what I conclude from this conversation, it largely looks like it's a very unorganized sector, right? But primarily because it's probably the first time many of these people are participating in a system like this or in an activity like this. So when you're talking about such an organized sector, how do you really, standardize processes? How do you, even if you said, the training went on very smoothly, beyond that, how do you standardize the processes of procuring your materials and making these crafts, packaging them, shipping them, the logistics, and building, a typical mainstream e-commerce business out of this?
Yeah. So what we've been able to do is build a fairly robust training curriculum, which sort of takes care of the quality aspect. What the women are expected to do in terms of production, and what is our expectation in terms of the quality standards. So I, very happy again. I don't know if we got lucky, but I'm very happy to say that our rejection rate is less than 1%.
Oh, okay.
In terms of what the women make and bring to the center and submit. And again, one other aspect here is the craft that we have chosen, and one of the sort of important points when we choose craft is, does the craft allow you to sort of give you the liberty to correct your mistakes? With both the craft that we work with, when they come to the center and submit something, and if we find that there is a defect, it can be opened up and it can be corrected and redone and brought back. So there is no wastage in terms of material, and they still get the money for it, by putting a little bit of additional time. So that has helped us to keep this rejection rate very less. Also, our training is extremely stringent, and it goes on for between 2 to 3 weeks, multiple steps. So this allows the women to sort of get on board in terms of our expectations, in terms of quality, in terms of punctuality, in terms of a variety of aspects that we expect the women to adhere to continue to work with us. And that's worked superbly in terms of the production and the quality control. In terms of standardization, again, that's built-in part of the training process, where each woman is given a sample of the product. So before they get the product, to submit with us, they do that quality check at their end itself first to see that whether everything that they're making, is it in line with the sample that's been given to them. So that sort of becomes the first checkpoint. And then when they come to this resource center, there's again a quality check that happens at that, there at the resource center. And then it goes into the inventory, and before the product is shipped, there's another quality check that happens. So the quality control process brings in that standardization in terms of the whole production, system. In terms of, how we manage the e-commerce bit is, that's centralized, that all of that happens out of our mother resource center, which is the resource center that holds all the inventory. That is where we do the order processing as well. So the packaging and quality control, all of this, the pre and the post-production activities happen in this mother resource center. So there it is centralized, and hence we're able to maintain that standardization as far as what product goes out to the market.
Very interesting. So do you maybe see, the next generation of D2C brands stemming from rural India? And if so, what are the, key components or the key products or commodities that you think will become mainstream?
Yeah, I think there is already a lot happening. I don't think we have to wait too long for a lot more of such brands to stem out of rural India. I see a lot happening in the farm space, in agri space. There is a huge number of peers that I have met, with my networking effort, where they're doing some splendid job in the agri space. I think craft, hasn't got its space or hasn't got its attention. Because there's always this feeling that craft is decorative, right?
Right.
You're not really solving a problem by creating a decorative. So craft has really not found its space as yet. But with new thoughts and younger people coming into the fray, I see a change with the craft segment as well. How people view craft, with us as well. When we started off, we took the traditional path of using craft to make decoratives. But then after doing this for 2 years, we realized that we're actually not solving any problem, with making decoratives. And that's when we decided that we go out to the market and we do a conventional primary market research, understand the customers a little more. And then we figured that there's actually a space, for craft, which is not just decoratives, but which is focused on utility. And that's when we came up with a parallel, which is we're going through the phase of rebranding ourselves and creating this new brand. It's called The Good Gift, where we're looking at using craft to create conscious gifting solutions. For urban India, where there is a segment of the customers who want to give meaningful gifts to their friends and family. And they want it to be handmade, they want it to be natural fibers, but they also want it to be serving a utility, right? So craft can be used to make something meaningful. That's what we figured, and that's what we're working on. And I see other people also, sort of working in a similar space. So yes, a lot of new D2C brands can definitely stem from rural India, and also looking at what technology has to offer. It's really made things location agnostic, right? It really doesn't matter where you're sitting, which part of the world you're sitting. You could be servicing your market, which is in a completely different part of the globe. So yeah, I see a huge potential.
Very interesting. Now, since you really brought up gifting, at least from the way I understand it, gifting is one domain where at least the millennials and Gen Zs really like customization. People would want customization in terms of what the gift entails, in terms of the packaging, in terms of the wrapping, unboxing. So many layers to it, right?
Yeah.
How do you sort of integrate all of these elements into a business like yours?
Yeah. So it is, customization, personalization is something which is extremely important in gifting. So we have kept that also as part of our, solutioning. And it's not very difficult really in terms of, incorporating this if you, also use technology. So technology is also something, again, when you think of craft and then you speak of technology, you sort of have a question in mind, how are these two coming together? But we do intend to use technology to sort of make the solution that much more convenient. You spoke of a customer segment, which I think rates convenience very high.
Yeah.
People like it to be done fast, easy, and convenient. So we are looking to use technology to provide some of these solutions in terms of personalization, in terms of subscriptions, in terms of customization, in terms of people having the freedom or having the flexibility to make their own hampers, choose their own packaging, so on and so forth. That's where technology, we think, will help us or will give us an advantage.
Very interesting. So it's also very intriguing to see that technology becomes an integral part of craft business that's stemming out of rural India. These are probably 3 points that sort of form a triangle in an unexpected fashion, right? So you mentioned about craft not being mainstream yet, and you say it's primarily because people view it as decoratives, right? And if that is the case, you might have also seen a lot of social media accounts where people are maybe showing time lapses of the portraits that they're making or any crafts or handicrafts that they're doing. So social media has sort of become an integral part of how a lot of artists and craftsmen are able to make themselves known to the world and make their craft known to the world. How do you sort of see social media being an integral part of how you scale your venture, or how the people you work with become known to the world themselves and not just through Indian yards?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Social media is a big blessing. While I say that, uh, it's also a lot of clutter, that has, sort of, gathered over the last, few years at least, or last couple of years at least. But we still see social media as a big marketing channel for us, more so from a storytelling point of view, and that's where the people that we work with, the point that you mentioned, how do you bring more visibility to them, and talk more about the makers? And that's essentially what we've been doing as an enterprise, for the last 2 years, and we intend to continue to do that, but take it up a few notches as well, where we talk more about the process and the people behind these products. There will be some mention of the products, but it will be more the storytelling that we see social media helping in, because I think today people are more interested in the story than the product. Of course, the product has to be good, the product has to be eco-friendly, etc. That's a given. Now people take that for granted. What is the delta that people are looking for is the story, which is what we intend to focus. And social media is a fantastic way to bring the maker close to the consumer. It becomes extremely personal. We've seen that happen. And that's where we see social media playing an important role. And if I count LinkedIn into social media as well, I'm not sure if LinkedIn is a social media. I'm sure there's, it's a big
I mean,
debatable topic.
it's supposedly a social media for a different class of people. Yeah.
So if I bring that into the sphere as well, then it's a huge opportunity, and we intend to leverage that. We've been leveraging that to some extent. We intend to leverage that more in the future.
So I'm just a bit curious, how is LinkedIn very specifically useful for an application like yours?
Yeah. So for us, when I talk about gifting, there's corporate gifting, right? And you have all corporates on LinkedIn, and you have founders, co-founders, CEOs, procurement folks, everybody on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn that way becomes an extremely important channel for your B2B.
Okay.
And specifically, and for us, gifting means there is a big chunk of market with the corporates. So LinkedIn helps in that way, and also LinkedIn helps in terms of partnerships. There are opportunities. Because we're in the gifting space, there is opportunity in terms of partnering or collaborating with other enterprises who could be in doing similar work. And you could basically collaborate to bring a range which benefits two groups. It's not just
Right.
benefiting the group that you're trying to impact, it's also benefiting a group that somebody else is also trying to impact. So collaborations, partnerships, and of course sales, all of it, LinkedIn is a big opportunity.
Got it. So I think you just spoke about different participants in the value system or the value chain, sort of potentially collaborating and trying to create a win-win situation, sorts of. This kind of flashes ONDC in my mind. And how do you really see ONDC? What is ONDC according to you, and do you see it being a framework that's of use to businesses like yours? And how do you see this promoting decentralization or micro entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, but I'm really not sure if it is applicable to everybody at this point in time. The way or the limited knowledge that I have of ONDC, I'm thinking it probably helps, the Kirana stores, that segment, or it could help, micro or small traders. I really don't see ONDC at this point in time, at least, directly helping artisans who are manufacturing products. I feel ONDC at this point in time could be helping a lot of small traders who are procuring from artisans and selling, or being the sort of an interface between the artisan and the customer, the end customer. So I see ONDC helping that segment at this point in time. It's basically trying to make it easier for smaller traders to reach customers. Today, you see the likes of Amazon and Flipkart, who pretty much have sort of they hold the major share of that market. So ONDC could, and they have their own frameworks, right? You got to work according to their framework and their protocol. ONDC probably could challenge that shareholding, so to say,
Right.
in that market segment. So that's what I see ONDC as at this point in time. I'm not sure if it will directly benefit us. Maybe it will in the future, but not at the moment.
Okay, but I think one element when we talk about ONDC is, like you rightly mentioned, when Amazon or Flipkart or e-commerce giants are really centralizing, what it also means is they really drive the algorithms and the suggestions that we receive for purchases, which means, smaller brands, or if you were to maybe consider, Indian Yards as a brand, or each of your artisans or craft workers as a brand in themselves, and if they were promoting their products out of their brand, what it means is potentially they might not make it to the front page or the most suggested options of on Amazon or Flipkart, right? So I think ONDC in part tries to solve something like this, where it kind of makes sure that everyone who is registered with ONDC is has an equal chance at being shown to the audience, sort of.
Yeah. So there's a question there, Krishna. At some point in time, ONDC also is going to have a lot of sellers, right? A lot of people who want their product to be in the front. Then how does a customer, get the visibility of a particular artisan? So there is going to be a rush for that visibility space. So the question in my mind is, how is ONDC going to manage that visibility? Because there's only so much visibility, right? There's only so much that you can see, or so much that a customer can see. So when the supply swells up, then how do you manage visibility is a question, which I'm not sure if there is an answer to that.
Got it. So it's almost like telling there can only be, these many celebrities on social media because there's finite amount of time that we can devote to the screen. Exactly. So how can people occupy more of the real estate? Yeah, I think that's a very interesting perspective. So, what would you say to someone in their teens or early 20s who maybe has an inclination for social ventures, but is maybe clueless what to do, or how to even look at it as a business? What do you have to say for such students and aspiring entrepreneurs?
I think the future of the social movement that's sort of kicked off in India is lies with these youngsters, to be honest, because I think a lot of us who have gotten into this space have gotten in quite late in our career, or quite late in our time. But I really am hopeful that, and I interact with a few youngsters, and I see that they're thinking far ahead of their age, and their awareness is far more than what we had. At least I'm talking about my generation. I'm 40 now, just to give you an idea. So I think one of the key things that I would like to say to youngsters, or what I say to youngsters, is to spend time in the area of interest. For example, you want to do something in waste management. You got to go through an immersive experience, because seldom when we start to solution, we fall in love with the solution, or with our solution, right? So then the problem sort of takes a backseat, and the beneficiary also to some extent takes a backseat, because you're so much in love with your solution. To avoid this situation, I think people need to go through an immersive experience. I mean, youngsters need to go through an immersive experience. And when I say immersive, spend 6 months, 8 months, 1 year with the beneficiaries, or with the problem area that you want to solve, so that you understand the problem deeply, in some sense, falling in love with the problem, I think, is a better situation than falling in love with the solution. So I would say get that immersive experience, because it's extremely important that you understand the actual problem of the beneficiary, or of the whatever you're trying to solve. So I think that's the key important. Once that is sorted and you have absolute clarity in terms of what problem you're trying to solve, and how what is then comes the solution. Then they have to focus on the value that they're trying to generate for this set of beneficiaries, or for the problem area that they're trying to work on. So understanding the problem through an immersive experience, and then understanding what value that they're able to generate, or they want to generate for this problem. I think these are two things that they need to focus on.
Got it. So you mentioned about students having to gain immersive experiences and try and understand the problem to the depth, right? But when you're talking about social enterprises, particularly having a commercial standpoint, customers and the demand side becomes very important. So what do you recommend for students to sort of look at the intersection of these two spaces to try and understand what might be a very economically positive sum game to solve any social problems that they're looking at?
Yeah. It's an extremely important point, Krishna, because this is one of the mistakes that we did, when we started our enterprise, where we obviously went through an immersive experience, and then we identified the problem, and then we created the enterprise, and we kept the beneficiary at the center of the entire enterprise design. And I think we did a fairly good job, in that space. But what we completely missed out is the customer, because when you have an economic aspect to your enterprise, you want an economic output. Who's going to pay for it is the question. And the answer to that question is the customer, right? So then the customer also needs to be an important part when you're going about designing your enterprise, going about figuring out what products you want to sort of create, and how are you going to take it to the customer, so on and so forth, the entire value chain. Then customer becomes an important part of that value chain. Now, when I look at, and based on my interaction of social enterprises, what I've seen is that there are two kinds of enterprises. One is, of course, an enterprise where the beneficiary and the customer is the same, right? As an example, you're trying to bring clean drinking water, to a certain community. Here, your beneficiary and your customer is the same, right? The beneficiary is the paying customer as well.
Right.
But then you take an example like us, where we're using craft to generate livelihood. So then the beneficiary is of course the community we're working with, but the customer is the person who's buying the product. So the paying person is the customer here. So you got to look at what is the kind of problem that you're solving, and basis that problem, figure out whether your beneficiary and your customer is the same. If they're the same, then it makes it a little more easier for you, because then you're keeping the same community or the same stakeholder in at the center of the enterprise when you're building the enterprise and making decisions. But when you have the beneficiary and the customer as different, you cannot do without either of them. Of course, you started your organization to solve the beneficiary's problem, but you can only solve it if you're also solving a customer problem. Then you got to identify and grapple and solution with two different problem statements, right? So that's the journey that we went through as well, where I clearly identified the beneficiary problem. We set out the solution for the beneficiary problem, but we didn't spend enough time identifying the customer problem, and hence build a solution around it, which is what we're doing now, after having sort of started the enterprise 2 years ago, right? So this is an important aspect that these youngsters need to keep in mind. One is the immersive experience, and then the other, understanding the problem and accordingly figuring out who your stakeholders are, and accordingly then sort of building solutions for everybody who's involved.
Got it. I'm sort of asking maybe a naive question here, but I am really curious to know this. So, if you mentioned that someone in their early 20s should maybe try and understand markets first or customers first, and sort of look at what the demand is or what the pain points of the customer are before going ahead and solutioning something for your beneficiaries. So I sort of look at this as a two-way approach, right? For you to have enough market understanding, it largely boils down to what kind of solution you're looking at. For instance, in your case, it's possibly the crafts industry, but there's possibly many more ways to solve for people around you other than just crafts industry, right? Maybe with the kind of plantations that arise there, or maybe with the kind of architecture that stems out of Nilgiris, or maybe through bamboo translational research kind of stuff. So when how do you see a student typically narrowing down a specific domain? Because we're talking from a standpoint of the problem statement of the beneficiary being of prime interest to the student or the entrepreneur. How do you suggest that they gain in-depth understanding of the different sectors that they could potentially delve into to find a means to solve this problem?
See, I think the starting or the first aspect or the first stage would definitely be understanding the problem of the beneficiary. It always starts there. Once you've understood the problem of the beneficiary, depending on what that problem is, then you set out to do the solutioning. Now, the solutioning for that problem could be something that stems from the region, like you were saying, something which is already available in Nilgiris. What is also important is what is the skills that you bring to the table, as an individual. I think while I'm not really a veteran entrepreneur, what I've realized in the little time that I've spent in this journey is it's extremely important for you to understand what skills that what means or resources that you have at hand when you begin this journey, and make use of those resources rather than trying to build something which, or trying to use something that you don't have access to.
Got it.
It is extremely important. So that's where, when we started with craft, that's a skill we had. Sunita has been a craft enthusiast, for over 10 years. So she had that skill or the ability to learn new craft and transfer that skill to other people. So that became the center of our solutioning. So when people have first understood the problem and when they move into the solutioning, it's extremely important at that stage for them to understand what is it that they bring to the table, and start with what they have in front of them. And then, of course, there's always, fine tuning and evolution that happens, when you start interacting with people, when you start networking, when you start looking at what other people are doing, maybe in different region, maybe within the region. All of that will happen, at a later stage. But what is important, where do you start, is you start with what you have at the moment or at that moment.
Right. So you mentioned about a certain degree of technological intervention that you're looking at, particularly when it comes to rural entrepreneurship and the industry of crafts. So someone, who's maybe not very excited about, let's say, social entrepreneurship as such, or entrepreneurship in general, but is maybe a fairly good engineer who can design systems, be it computational or mechanical or electrical. What do you see as the potential roles of technology, right? Or what kind of engineering skills are you looking for? By you, I don't necessarily mean Indian yards, but in general, for an industry like yours, what kind of technological skills are required?
I think specifically, if I look at the craft space, that's where we are. I think there are two things that stand out clearly. One is mechanical engineering is something that would definitely be of use, and then there's, of course, the computer engineering, or folks who can basically build technologies that could help us reach our customers faster or service our customers faster. So technology from that aspect, and then technology from a mechanical aspect, because there are still some parts of the process which can be mechanized to some extent to of course It's not the core, um, method to make a product, but an auxiliary. Something that does not need individual hands to make. For example, cutting as a process. Instead of having to cut a certain material individually by an individual person, can there be a mechanical help, a mechanical intervention to manage that aspect of the process? So I think these are two technology areas that would help at least the space that we are in.
Got it. So through your journey, what are some myths about social entrepreneurship that you've discovered?
I think the term social enterprise itself is not fully understood.
Okay.
I feel that this term is widely used, and also I'm not sure if it's rightly used as well. I think when people create enterprises who are employing people from the lesser privileged communities, then there is an assumption that it's a social enterprise, right? So I think it is. It's a personal opinion, right? So don't hold me to this, but
Sure.
I feel that a social enterprise, and I'm actually also a disclaimer that I want to sort of state upfront to you, and I'd recently written about this on LinkedIn, is these labels are very misleading, and these definitions sort of tie you down to certain characteristics. And I personally, of course, I've used these terms a lot in the past, but going forward, I'm going to make a conscious effort to not use these terms because they don't really tell the right story. Anyways, coming back to your question, I think for me, what I consider a social enterprise is an enterprise that is solving a problem with the bottom 25% of the pyramid.
Okay.
So it's not just providing employment to the lesser privileged, right?
Mhm.
Or it's not just about solving any social problem. I feel a social enterprise is an enterprise that is solving a problem, a real problem, which is being experienced by the bottom 25% of the pyramid. Pulling people out of poverty
Okay.
is a social enterprise. Solving clean drinking water for a community is a social enterprise. So I would consider these enterprises to be more towards being a social enterprise than an enterprise who is just creating employment. For example, if I have to give an example, I think a lot of mainstream organization can also stake claim to be a social enterprise because they're generating a lot of employment. I have an industry. It's called needle industries, and they're based here in the Nilgiris. They make needles. I don't know if you've heard of pony needles.
Not
pretty much in
really.
India,
Okay.
I think every household has. You should ask your mother the needle
Sure.
that she uses. I think is pony. They're I think in every household. They have established an industry here about more than 100 years ago.
Wow.
And,
Okay.
and it's been running. The climate here and the environment here suited the process of making needles, right? So that's why they set up the industry here. But the fact is that they are fueling the economy of an entire region. Within Nilgiris, there is not a few, a number of villages who are benefiting because of needle industries being there. Because of their existence, there are a lot of villages that are benefiting, and there's a lot of employment that they've generated. Now, can needle industries be called a social enterprise? That's the question that we need to answer. So that's where I say that these labels are not fully understood. I think it's not just in India, it is across the globe. There are multiple definitions to it. There is another angle to social enterprise which says that all the profits that you generate should be going back into the company.
Right.
Right. So that's another thing. So there are multiple aspects to these definitions. I personally, that's why I'm choosing to stay away from these labels and definitions. For me personally, if you're impacting the bottom 25% of the pyramid, then yes, I think you're in that region of being a social enterprise.
I mean, that's a very interesting take when you talk about, mainstream companies falling under the category of social enterprises primarily because they are maybe generating tons of employment for people in the bottom 25%. I'd never thought of it from that standpoint. I don't think many would have. Very interesting. So when we're talking about, for instance, I was recently reading this book called Poor Economics by Abhishek Banerjee, the Nobel Prize laureate. And, one of the anecdotes that was mentioned in the book was about how they were trying to launch a certain free vaccination program, I think in some parts of Kolkata, which is extremely, rural areas. And there was a free vaccination program. And despite that, women would never turn up with their children to get them vaccinated. Until after a few months, they came up with a scheme that for every vaccination that you give your child, we'll give you, I think, 1 kg dal free, and that sort of turned up boosted the conversion rate to maybe by 100-200%. So I think there's a large incentive gap here. So when we're talking about trying to, let's say, influence or generate employments for the bottom 25%, what are some counterintuitive facts that you've come across, or some very critical standpoints or insights that sort of make it difficult to really penetrate into that market, and so what is the right kind of insight to keep in mind before we really solve for them? Or how do you, let's say, tackle such challenges of them being open and aware to change?
I think, it's again an interesting question, Krishna, because this is something that we grapple with as well, with the communities that we work with. And I remember, I don't remember where I read this, but, whatever I read, sort of got me thinking. And I realized that when somebody has lived with inadequacy for a very long period of time, I think it's very difficult for that person to think of abundance and think of potential, right? So if you've always been among scarcity, I think your outlook is very different. It's very difficult for you and me to imagine that outlook. But that's the understanding, or that's the experience, or that's the realization that I have got interacting with these communities, is because they have lived among scarcity for a very long time, generation after generation. The idea of abundance and the idea of potential is very difficult for them to understand. So when we speak to them about the potential that this intervention has, they are not able to understand. What is in front of them right now is the debt that they have to pay at the end of the week, and of course the food that they need to put on the table. Now, I'm not sort of pointing fingers at the government, but some of the interventions that the government has put is being counterproductive to some extent, in the sense of in terms of the whole distribution of ration, that system that's there, where these communities get some amount of ration at subsidized rates or free to some extent. What is also happening is that a certain segment of these communities have gotten into a comfort zone, where the food is actually not, we use this term food on the table, but actually there is food on the table. Why? Because the government is providing that facility. So that basic need of food on the table actually is taken care of, right? So they get into that comfort, the lack of ability to see potential, and this comfort that is coming in from the government in terms of food being on the table. Both of these put together, it becomes difficult for us to get through to that thinking or get through that outlook that some segments of these communities have. There are members of these communities who are aspirational, who are ambitious, who want more than what they are, currently have access to. But there is also that segment where they don't want to take that step.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, right? I mean, we often say that hunger makes you work, and the moment you may be taken care of your basic requirements, and if you've never thought beyond it, that may be sort of engulfs you into a setting where you do not want to think beyond it.
Yes,
quite an interesting take. So maybe talking from the consumer insight standpoint, have you seen any peculiar behavior when it comes to consumers towards products that stem out from rural settings, or through, let's say, crafts that are built in Nilgiris, or something stemming out of rural entrepreneurship? The reason I ask this is primarily because, let's say if I wanted to go buy home decor, I'm probably going to Pepperfry or IKEA, or, going to one of these stores and picking up something at much affordable prices. As opposed to, let's say, I have to go to, let's say, Indian Yard's website and look for handicrafts. How do you sort of deal with the consumer behavior here?
See, I think from a consumer behavior point of view, what is important, what I have again felt in our journey is to identify your segment, right? See, everybody is not your consumer.
Right.
Everybody, if you made a product and if you put it up on your, on your website, it's not that everybody will come and be interested in your product, or everybody doesn't become your consumer. There is clear segmentation of the market that needs to be done, and you need to identify who your customer segment is. For example, I cannot imagine to do well on Amazon because the customer segment on Amazon is very different.
Right.
There is more value for money sort of a mindset. Somebody wants something in the most cost effective way. That's how Amazon is built. That's how Amazon operates, right? So I cannot expect to do well on Amazon. So I need to know who my customer segment is, and I need to know where I can reach that customer segment. So one challenge that we often face when we have not sort of identified a customer segment, and one of the pitfalls that most people in the craft industry at least face, is there's a clear cost difference. A product that is produced in the factory versus a product that is handmade, you cannot compare the cost, especially if you look at an enterprise like us, who has a decentralized model where products are being made in a woman's home, and we are looking to generate equitable income for that woman, which means the cost of production is definitely going to be higher compared to a product that is generated in a factory setting, where irrespective of, in fact, forget about irrespective, the whole focus is to drive productivity. So it's extremely difficult for you to compare a product that is coming out of our kind of model, where the focus is on decentralizing the production model and creating equitable income for the makers. You can't compare that with a model where products are made in a factory and productivity is continuously driven to improve. So the costs are going to be different. So that's where the challenge is, because often the consumer is not aware of this difference, and consumer is not aware of this sort of equation. So hence it becomes extremely important to choose your customer segment right, so that you're able, the effort that you put in to educate your consumer is that much less. If you try to educate a consumer who's going on Amazon looking for a value for money product, this education process is going to either not happen, or even if it happens, it's going to happen at a great cost. Whereas you choose your customer segment right, where the customer is open to listening to you, customer is already a purpose-driven consumer, then your education happens that much faster with as much less effort or cost to acquiring that customer.
So
that's
you
the
kind of
build.
see, crafts as maybe falling into the part of the arts, luxury, premium segments, gifting kind of solution, which is maybe catering to a very finite section of the society, but people with high disposable income or high propensity. Very interesting. So I just sort of put up 5 questions to. I wouldn't necessarily say rapid fire and stuff, but I would certainly say, sort of concise answers to just gauge your perspectives. So, what's one thing that most people who are very certain or very motivated to solve social problems fail to understand about this entire game?
I think the problem statement, I think that's where most people sort of miss the point, so to say. Understanding the problem that they're trying to solve or they want to solve is, I guess, where people can go wrong or do go wrong.
So yeah, tell me, Suhas, what do you think is maybe one myth when it comes to how people look at impacting lives? Because there tends to be a lot of momentum and enthusiasm, but systems around tend to be more complex. So is there something that people are doing wrong when it comes to how they approach impacting lives?
Yeah, I think there is one certain misconception that I have seen among people who cross over or are looking to cross over to the social sector, is that they think that they move into the social sector and then in month 2 they will bring smiles to 200 people. It doesn't work that way. It's a very long drawn gradual process. It takes months and sometimes years to even understand the problem, and then subsequently it takes months and years to figure out what solution works best for the beneficiary, not what solution works for us as social entrepreneurs, but what works for the beneficiaries. So it takes quite a bit of time between this understanding problem, understanding solutions, so on and so forth. So one needs to be patient, and one needs to be open in terms of the timeline to actually start seeing impact happening on ground.
Sure, but when we speak of, let's say, having patience and sticking through it, and it comes from, let's say, a place of passion and motivation for solving a certain problem, but it's also true that, when you're operating, let's say, an institution at scale, maybe you have to support a team, maybe you have to carry along so many people with you. So how do you sort of, let's say, keep everyone motivated? And it's always not very possible to sort of look at it from a volunteering perspective, right? And especially when we're looking at it from a commercial standpoint, and we infuse terms like entrepreneurship into this, how do you sort of look at the balance between, let's say, having enough patience and delivering consistently versus trying to optimize for some performance metrics?
So that's where building the right team comes into play. So when you approach social entrepreneur on enterprise or social entrepreneurship, I think it's important that you look at it through a slightly different lens than you would for a typical enterprise or for a typical startup. Then it's important for you to bring people into your team who are equally passionate about the problem that you're trying to solve. Then the patience becomes a culture as part of the team. So that becomes extremely important because there is no other way of doing this. Right. It is a long drawn process, and one needs to be patient, and that's where building the right team becomes very important.
But do you think there could be some level of, let's say, systemic cushion to sort of encourage more of such initiatives? Could it be it from, let's say, governments, be it more from the society in general? Do you think anything can be built in place so that there's more reason and more incentive for people to devote more time and significant efforts, especially in their younger days, to efforts like this?
Absolutely. I think more from a policy point of view, more from a government support point of view, there are a lot of schemes that the government has to offer for entrepreneurs who are stepping into this space, but it's still riddled with a lot of protocol and procedures. So in the end, most of these enterprises don't get to realize the benefit that the government has, put out there, on paper. So I think a systemic change or a policy change might help the situation in encouraging more folks to step into this domain. But I think that's essentially what I see as a change from a society point of view. I think also if you're a product enterprise, if you end up being a product enterprise, if you end up being an enterprise which is having a solution which has a product focus, then yes, embracing this as a customer and playing the role of a customer is something that the society could look at as well. So that's how the society could play its role. There is also you mentioned volunteering. I think it also plays a very important role. In fact, that's something that we are beginning to realize as an enterprise, and we are making changes within our way of working to incorporate this sense of volunteering, within our ways of working, because I feel that there are a lot of people out there who probably are not in a situation to, leave their comfort, and completely turn to this domain. But yet they are interested to participate in the change in some way, right? And it's just that today they don't see it being easy. The whole volunteering, effort, it's not as straightforward or easy as it can be. So I think for us social enterprises, I think this is again one area that we have not looked at, seriously, is how do we make this whole volunteering experience a little more convenient for folks who are wanting to give their time.
So when you speak of inconvenience, what exactly is the challenge? Is it more of a time constraint that people have, or is it more of geographical, sparsely populated structures?
Yes. So one is geography, and I think the other aspect is people have specific skills, right? They have, built their careers in a particular domain or with a particular skill set. Can we as social entrepreneurs be a little more organized in terms of highlighting or listing down specific areas that where we need help, where we need volunteers from those? Give you one example of an organization which is doing a great job in this domain is Tata. Tata runs a program called Tata Pro Engage, where it has built a platform where all social enterprises can come and list projects which they need immediate help for, or where they need help. Tata then opens this platform to all its employees across India, and they can go through the list of projects that social enterprises has listed, and they can sign up for it, saying, hey, I have the skill or I have experience working in this domain and I want to help. This is making it easy. I've often come across situations where people, give me a buzz and say, hey, you know what, I want to volunteer. I can help in any way, that I can help. It's very vague. It's very vague for the person who's wanting to volunteer, and it's very vague for me as an enterprise as well, right? So whatever time they spend, we should make the most out of it, for both of us. The person should walk away feeling satisfied, fulfilled, that he or she has actually solved the problem, which is very real. And for the enterprise, the amount of time they've spent with the volunteer should make tangible, sense or tangible benefit.
So the problem kind of boils down to mutual discovery in the first place.
Yes.
Okay.
Discovery and making it as tangible as possible.
Right. So in a way, do you think sort of, let's say, going out and building in public, which is the typical jargon we use, just putting yourself out there from the earliest stages where people have a good idea of what you're doing, where people are up to date on what, you're trying to achieve. And that sort of maybe gives that, discovery and allows people to see if they resonate with maybe what you're trying to do, and then maybe participate as well.
Absolutely. And so for example, most of us have websites, have a section of your website dedicated for volunteers. Keep listing projects that, you're seeking people to put their hands up. They should come with that prior background or experience or skill set. I think that way it's making it more transparent, more convenient, more goal oriented. And at the end of the day, after the project is done, both of us are happy, that we actually helped each other.
So today, isn't there, an angel list or an Indeed or a LinkedIn for finding volunteers and for
I haven't come across something that,
Okay.
I haven't come across something which is as organized as it should be. apart from Tata Pro Engage that I came across, I really haven't come across anything else. I could be missing something, but I haven't come across anything else.
Very interesting. Sure. Okay. So power or money, what would you pick?
Wow. I don't think I can choose either.
What would be your pick if there was a third option? Maybe time, freedom?
I think time.
Okay.
I think time for me is more important.
Okay. What would you do differently if, you were to start Indian Yards today, or if you were to go to Nilgiris today with all your learnings from the last 5 to 6 years?
I think nothing, and I actually had this sort of conversation. I was having this conversation with Sunita. I think while we have made mistakes, and I spoke about mistake that we had made, which was in terms of forgetting about the customer, and not integrating the consumers into the entire enterprise design and how we want to do things. In the hindsight, I think the experience that we got in terms of being immersed with the beneficiary and with their problems, I think that has put us in a very, very good position to actually truly solve their problem. I think if we had gotten the consumers early on in the journey, I suspect that we may have sort of our path could have gotten a little blurred, because we're trying to bring what we spoke of earlier, right? We're trying to solve a social problem with an economic output, right? When you're bringing these together, I think having clarity between these two aspects is extremely important, and that clarity only comes with time. So the time that we spent with the beneficiaries and the time that we spent with those initial months, years that we spent building this enterprise, if we had gotten the consumers early on, I suspect that things would have gotten blurred a bit, and we could have even missed the point in terms of the problem that we're trying to solve for the beneficiary. So I think that initial time that we spent in isolation with the beneficiaries was very helpful, and that's why I don't think I'll go back and change anything.
Very interesting. I think there's been a very lovely conversation, Suhas, touching upon points on, how do you really define social enterprise? Who is it supposed to cater to? And, what are maybe the problems within the bottom 25%? And how do you really address this? And how do you not miss the consumer perspective in this entire journey? I think this conversation has been very insightful. Thanks a lot for doing this. Any concluding thoughts that you want to share?
Not really. I mean, I think we've spoken and we've covered a lot of aspects, with all the questions. I think all your questions have been very, pertinent and extremely pointed. So I think great set of questions. It made me think as well. I'm sure after this conversation, I will be reflecting on some of the questions that you asked and some of the answers that I gave. And maybe there'll be some learning for me as well from this conversation. So I'm extremely happy with this conversation. What I'm also, sort of very excited about is the next generation of social entrepreneurs. I can see a lot of interest with some of the youngsters that I've interacted with. My son is 16, so he's among them. I truly think that India is sort of getting up for something big in the social space in the coming years. So I'm quite excited of what's going to happen in the future.
Right, and I would certainly love to hear your thoughts after you've introspected and reflected on this discussion. Maybe there's a lot for me to learn as well.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks a lot for doing this, Suhas.